Hello, chess fans. Welcome to another edition of Chess Chat, a program designed to give you, the viewer, a better understanding and an appreciation of the wonderful world of chess. I am your host, George Marigenian, Program Director of the Wachusett Chess Club at Fitchburg State College. This club meets every Wednesday evening from 7 to 11 in room C-199 of the McKay Campus School at the college. And with me, once again, is my trusty co-host, Martin Lane, the current Wachusett Chess Club champion and one of the most active and strongest chess players in North Central Massachusetts. Welcome, Marty.
Hello, George.
Well, Marty, today we are going to focus our attention on one of the greatest chess players in the history of the game. His name, Siegbert Tarrasch.
Right, every chess player knows the name.
Yeah, absolutely. Every serious chess player
Right.
knows the name of Siegbert Tarrasch, Dr. Siegbert Tarrasch, because actually Tarrasch was a doctor of medicine.
Right, and a practicing medical doctor.
He did practice medicine. He practiced in Nuremberg, Germany.
Right.
On February 17th, we're going to be observing the 75th anniversary.
175th.
No, it was the 75th. He died in 1934, February 7th, 1934. He was born in Breslau, Germany, and he actually took up chess seriously when he was age 15. He had known the game earlier than that, but he really didn't take a serious interest until he was around 15. And then after he graduated from high school, in Germany it's called the Gymnasium,
Right.
he went to the University of Berlin to study medicine at the age of 18. But of course in Berlin, the attraction of the big city, and you have all the top chess players in Germany back then, in the 1880. He was mesmerized by the fact that he was surrounded by all these great chess players. So he took an interest, certainly a serious interest in chess back then. But Dr. Tarrasch actually had an opportunity. He was invited by the Havana Chess Club to play for the World Championship with Wilhelm Steinitz,
Right.
who was the first official world champion. But you know what? He declined the invitation. You know why?
No.
Because he put his medical practice ahead of chess.
Right.
He says, I'm just too busy with my patients, my medical responsibilities, so he declined there. Then the opportunity came later on, I think in 1904, 1903, 1904, he challenged Emanuel Lasker, who had defeated Steinitz for the World Championship. He had challenged Lasker for a World Championship match, and because of a skating accident that he suffered, he asked Lasker for a postponement, a one-year postponement.
Right.
And Lasker said, no, I'm not going to give it to you.
Now, Lasker tended to avoid challenges.
Yes, absolutely, he did.
So in this way, he used this as kind of an excuse to avoid playing Tarrasch.
Right. Now, again, our director, Darren Day, I don't know whether we've shown it already, but we actually have a photo or photos of Siegbert Tarrasch, and actually a picture of, there is a very beautiful, it's a very good photo of Tarrasch. You see how elegantly he's dressed? He always dressed fastidiously and elegantly in chess tournaments. So this is a very good photo of him from the late 1880s, or probably early 1890s. He is actually he's buried in Munich, Germany, where he died. And here is actually the gravestone on the right, which was recently discovered. His grave remained unknown. It was known that he was buried in Nord Friedhof in Munich, but no one said, we have to find this. So this is a new gravestone, and you will notice something here on the gravestone.
Well, on the gravestone, it designates him as a Grossmeister, a Grand Master. Now, wasn't he one of the original Grand Masters?
Yes, one of the original 5. But it's interesting, actually, below his name, you see the word Arzt.
Right.
That was put first, because he was first and foremost a doctor.
Doctor, right.
So an Arzt is the German word for doctor. So this is actually a new gravestone that they actually have placed in this cemetery in Munich, Germany. So we're going to present a game that Dr. Tarrasch played in 1893 in St. Petersburg, Russia, with a player we have discussed on a previous program, Mikhail Chigorin, who was the founder of the Russian School of Chess. And this was a match a 22-game match that ended in a draw. Each player won 9 games, and there were 4 draws. But this is one of the most interesting games from that match. It was the 5th game of that match in which Tarrasch had white. So let's start this game and see how this game progressed. So first move for white by Tarrasch.
First move was he moves the pawn e2 to e4. We've seen this before. It's one of the strongest and most popular opening moves. It occupies the central square, which is key, attacks 2 squares on the black side, but more importantly, it opens up 2 important diagonals, one for the white squared bishop and one for the queen. Very good.
Well, it's Chigorin's move, and his reply for move 1 is to play e5, e7 to e5. And this is a very logical answer because it does the same thing for black. It opens up actually the diagonal for the dark squared bishop for black as well as the diagonal for the queen. Right. And it also tries to contest the center. This is what the chess opening is all about. Control of the center, fighting for the center. All right, so it's Tarrasch's second move.
Right, and keeping that in mind, I've been saying, in addition to controlling the center, you want to develop your pieces. You want to get your pieces out where you can play with them. And so he chooses to play for his second move, the knight on g1 to f3, attacking the black pawn on e5, forcing black to do something to defend it.
Right, the first threat of the game.
Right.
So the pawn is attacked.
From the second move. Yeah.
Okay. Now this pawn can be defended in different ways, but black, Chigorin, with his second move, plays actually the most logical. He develops his knight on b8 and plays knight c6. So he develops a piece. Again, it's very important in the opening phase of chess, in the chess game, to bring the pieces into play. And this knight development simultaneously defends the pawn on e5. So it's Tarrasch's third move.
And what Tarrasch says, looking at the board, he sees that he's opened up that diagonal for the white squared bishop, and so he chooses to develop it, and he develops it in a way that attacks. He plays it to b5, attacking the bishop on c6, and thereby renewing the attack on the pawn on e5.
Does this opening have a name?
Well, in the United States, in English, we call it the Ruy Lopez.
Yes.
In most of the rest of the world, it's known as the Spanish game.
Okay, now, what is this Ruy Lopez?
Well, Ruy Lopez, as I understand it, was a Catholic priest in the 1500s in Spain who is credited with being the first player to popularize it, to develop it, analyze it, I believe. And so it was named after him, at least in the English-speaking world, and as I say, in other countries it's known more commonly as the Spanish game.
Yes, it is. And Ruy Lopez, the Spanish priest, wrote a book in 1561. That's
right, this goes far back.
That goes far back. And he recommended this, bishop b5 against the knight to c6, because he did not consider knight c6 the best move for black on the second move, because it allowed white to attack this knight.
Right.
So it's rather interesting that he said this is a bad move for black. Right. But actually we know nowadays that knight c6, there's nothing wrong with knight c6.
And this is one of the most popular openings in the chess repertoire.
Okay. So it's black's turn, black's third move, and black has choices. Black actually could play d6, further adding to the defense of this pawn on e5, bring out the knight to f6. That's a possibility, attacking the pawn on e4. But what theoreticians have shown to be more effective is to put the question to that bishop that's attacking the knight by playing a6. So that is the move played by black, a6, attacking the bishop and saying to white, what are you going to do? Are you going to take my knight or are you going to retreat?
Right. And that's the question for white for his fourth move. Now, if he retreats the pawn, well, it makes no sense to come to c4 because he can simply be kicked away and has to move it again. That would be a waste of a move. If he comes to d3, he blocks the development of his d pawn. If he comes to e2, he's wasted a move just to get there where he could have gone there in the first instance. He could take the knight and then capture the pawn with his knight. That would lead to a whole series of variations known as the exchange variation that we may get into in a later program. But what Tarrasch chooses to do is to maintain the threat on on the c6 knight and simply backs up to a4 for his fourth move.
Okay. All right, that was his fourth move, retreating to a4. Now it's Chigorin's fourth move, and he plays knight f6. Comes out, attacks the pawn on e4.
Right. And here again, White has a number of choices. He could simply defend with pawn to d3. He could play queen to e2. What he chooses is to play his knight on b1 to c3, developing a piece, defending the pawn.
Okay. And this is actually a variation which Tarrasch pioneered.
Right.
Because this is actually also known as the four knights variation in the Ruy Lopez, but a lot of players know it as the Tarrasch variation.
Right.
So Tarrasch believed in mobility. He says, get those pieces out. You can actually bring pieces in the game which defend as well as aid in the development, do it. So he was a firm advocate of mobility. So it is Chigorin's move, and he plays the bishop on f8. He plays bishop b4. That's his move. He attacks the knight.
Right. And here again, now by attacking the knight, this leaves the e4 pawn vulnerable, because if he's allowed to exchange, then black can capture that pawn. So he has to sort of decide what he wants to do. He could try to defend the pawn and let the exchange go. But he comes up with an interesting move. He plays the knight on his sixth move. He plays the knight to d5, attacking the bishop, and also the knight on f6.
Okay. And is he not also threatening to win a piece?
Well, yes, he's threatening to win a piece. If he were to take the knight on c6 with this bishop on a4, that leaves the bishop on b4 vulnerable.
All right, so that's the threat.
Right.
The bishop takes on c6, and on the recapture, he's actually taking the bishop and winning the piece. All right, so this means that this bishop has to save itself. And what Chigorin did on his sixth move is, instead of retreating the move, the bishop to like c5, which was playable, or even e7, which is okay, he played it to a5.
Right.
And
which is fairly rare, as it turns out.
It is actually rare. And the question is, this is dubious, to put the bishop here, because actually you're depriving the knight
of a square.
You're taking
where
away
it might be more useful.
Where it might be useful
there. Get to c4 from there.
Okay, so it's...
he does maintain this pin on d2, which is really the purpose of it.
To stop the advancement of the pawn, the d pawn.
Because right now, White stands to lose that pawn.
Okay, so now it's White's move, seventh move coming up.
Seventh move. And so he chooses to basically unpin his knight by castling.
Okay, good move. In fact, it's always recommended to castle as early as possible in the game to put your king in a safe place and activate that rook, bring it toward the center, and centralize. Okay, so Chigorin's reply, seventh move coming up, he plays b5. Right. Attacks the bishop.
Attacks the bishop. The bishop has only one place to go. He goes to safety to b3 for his eighth move.
Right. Now, you see, if this bishop were not here now, this knight could have actually gone to a5 and attacked the bishop, and could have gotten rid of that bishop. But of course, that bishop now occupies the square, depriving the knight of doing that. All right, so bishop b3 was played by White. So what Black does here, he could castle immediately, but he plays d6.
Right.
All right, which now opens up for the diagonal for the white square.
And boosts the defense of the e5.
Okay.
And Tarrasch does pretty much the same thing. He plays the pawn to d3. He could play it all the way to d4. That would lead to a more open game. But he boosts the defense of his pawn by playing pawn to d3 on his ninth move.
All right. So it's Chigorin's ninth move coming up, and he plays bishop g4. Comes out here, attacks the knight, pins it. So what does Tarrasch do now?
Well,
is there a threat now?
Yeah, the big threat now is, besides being inconvenient, because if he moves the queen, then it would be to Black's advantage to exchange and open up a file against the king. That would be a problem. But the biggest threat right now is if he plays this black knight to d4, then there's going to be a vicious attack.
So if this knight is allowed to come in here, we have a double attack on the knight, and it's going to be able to capture here, and and actually
win
weaken...
a pawn.
And also,
right.
but it weakens the castled king position.
Right.
All right, so that must be stopped.
Right. And the
So
most effective way to stop it is to play, on his 10th move, he plays pawn to c3, which serves a number of purposes. It immediately, stops that knight to d5 or even to b5. It also could help for a future push to d4. It's a good move.
Okay. So it's Chigorin's move, it's 10th move. Now, he should be looking at the possibility that the Tarrasch could play the bishop to g5,
Right.
attacking this
A
knight
similar attack.
with a double attack on that
Right.
knight on f6. He could stop that play. H6 would stop that, which actually would seem reasonable to do that, to stop that pin.
Right.
But what he did is he now played this move, knight on c6. He plays it to e7. Now, what's this all about? What's he doing that for?
Well, it's a little puzzling. It looks like his intention is to try to exchange that knight and get that out of the way. You're right.
Right, we have a double attack on this knight, so it would be threatening to take...
Ease up the pressure on that.
All right,
but Tarrasch comes up with a really surprising and really the winning move in this game, I think. And that is he takes the knight on f3 and captures the pawn on e5, exposes his queen to an attack here, and he's just taking a pawn, but it has a lot of threats sort of hidden.
Now,
in this.
why would he do this? He's now allowing his queen to be taken. Let's show our viewers what happens if black were to take this queen, which would be a blunder.
Right.
Let's see it. Let's follow it through. Bishop takes on d1, winning the queen.
Right.
How does the Tarrasch continue?
Well, he takes this knight on f6 with check, so that now black has to do something.
All right, he either has to take that knight with the pawn, the only thing they can take, or he has to move the king, which only has one square. Let's see both continuation.
Okay.
Let's see what happens. If he takes the pawn, g takes f6,
okay,
then what happens?
Well, we look at the d7 square. The king can't go there.
Right.
He's got this bishop that came to b3 now attacking the f7 pawn, so he plays bishop take f7 check.
Giving him only one square
to go to.
So king f8 is forced.
And then bishop would come to h6 checkmate.
All right.
So he can't take the knight.
All right. So he can't take that knight. All right. So let's go back to this position, and we've got it like this. Okay. We've just taken the pawn here. Okay. So all right. So on this check, So what happens if he doesn't take that knight and just moves the king? How about if he just moves the king over here? Now, how does white continue?
Well, because of this knight on f6, now the king cannot go to e8 or g8. He's sort of stuck on that square.
So what does he do?
And with the other knight, he has a check on d7. The king cannot move.
Forcing the black to give back the queen. With queen takes d7.
Check.
And now what does
And then he takes the
white do?
queen with check.
Forcing him to move.
Forcing him to move.
So what if he goes over here and attacks the knight?
Well, now the knight really has no place that it can go at the moment. So he captures this bishop with the rook.
And then the king takes on d7.
And then he wins a pawn with bishop take f7. And so he comes up 2 pawns in the
He's
end.
2 pawns ahead.
Right, which at this level is a winning advantage.
It's a superior position. All right, so what the Chigorin overlook is this offer of a queen, which cannot be taken. It's poison. All right, so what's the move here? Where's this knight here? This knight is over here. Right, yes. Okay, so on knight takes e5, he cannot take the queen, but he captures d takes e5. 11th move for black. D takes e5.
Okay.
All right.
And
renews the threat on the queen.
Right. And now he plays knight take f6 check, which removes the protection from this
all right.
from the bishop on
So
g4.
he must recapture. G takes f6.
Right.
All right.
And now the queen captures the bishop on g4.
All right. Now what's the threat here?
That was the 13th move.
All right. So now he plays knight g6. That is actually black's 13th move.
Right.
All right. So now how does Tarrasch continue? 14th move coming up?
Right. So he's going to bring this, he's going to centralize this bishop. He's going to do it by attacking the rook on a8.
Okay.
He plays 14 bishop to d5.
Okay, this forces the rook to move to save itself. So the rook plays 14th move for black, rook b8.
b8, right.
It's safe.
Right.
Okay,
So
now-
now the king is caught, it's still in the middle of the board, and so what Tarrasch wants to do is it's time to mount an attack. He wants to get more pieces into the game. He can't do it with just the queen and the bishop. So he's going to start to open up the position even more. He's going to play 15 f4,
Okay.
pawn to f4.
Okay, that looks good, although he's attacking this pawn, but of course this pawn is defended twice, the knight on g6 as well as the pawn on f6. What Chigorin does now on his 15th move is somewhat puzzling, but he realizes that he's actually in a bind here as far as trying to seek counterplay. What he plays is c6. That's his 15th move. He attacks the bishop, but
the pawn is undefended.
the pawn is undefended. So what does Tarrasch do in response?
He captures the pawn with check. Takes the pawn, it's 16 bishop, take the pawn on c6, check.
Forcing now the king to move.
King has to move.
King moves up.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, so the king is actually on e7. King e7, 16th move for black. All
Now-
right, so now...
By moving that c pawn, though, he did open up a diagonal for the queen, and what he's threatening is to play queen to bishop 6, check,
Oh.
winning the bishop. So the
So
bishop...
the queen b6 check, forcing the king
King to
to either
move.
move or block, and then the queen wins the bishop.
Right.
So that's the threat.
So he has to put the bishop back to d5 where it's safe. So he plays 17 bishop to d5.
All right. All right, so now black has to seek some sort of counterplay here. What he does, he plays b4, advances the pawn from b5 to b4 on his 17th move.
Right, and he's threatening to win some pawns and open up some space on the queen side. Tarrasch, however, his attack is well advanced. He's going to go ahead, and he's going to play the pawn for 18. The pawn on f is going to take the pawn on e5.
All right. Ooh, now this pawn and the rook have a double attack on the pawn. But now what Chigorin does is plays what we call a Zwischenzug, an in-between move. He plays queen b6 check.
Right.
All right, forcing now white to do something about either blocking or moving the king.
Right.
There's
So he could block by advancing this pawn to d4, but he doesn't really want to give, he doesn't want to open up this side of the board. He doesn't want to give Chigorin that kind of counterplay. So he's going to move his king to safety. He's going to play the 19 king to h1.
Okay. Well, in response to that, Chigorin on his 19th move plays knight takes e5.
Right.
Attacks the queen, also attacks the pawn, but the major threat
Right.
is attack on the queen. All right, so it's Tarrasch's move.
Okay, so he sees that the bishop is attacking the pawn on f7. He's going to increase the pressure by getting the queen away from the threat, but adding pressure by playing queen to h5.
What's the threat?
Well, the immediate threat is if he can push the knight away, then he can play queen take pawn check.
Aha, so this knight that's protecting the f7 pawn can be dislodged,
Right.
allowing the queen to come in with the check
Right.
with devastating consequences. All right, so in response to queen h5, what Chigorin does on his 20th move, plays knight g6. He plays it back,
Right, he's
which blocks.
blocking that diagonal.
All right,
Looks like he's trying to make a safety
Yes.
spot for his
All
queen.
right.
So Tarrasch does kind of another surprising move. He plays rook take the pawn on f6, attacking the queen, but that rook is not really defended.
Wow, we got the major threat is the attack on the queen, but we also have the threat of
Right, now
taking the
taking
pawn
that
with
pawn
check.
with check, right.
All right, now, why cannot black take this rook with the queen? If rook takes f6, which was not played, he doesn't do it. Why is that
Well,
bad?
because white can win the queen. He can pin it by bishop to g5, pinning the queen against the king. So the king.
All right, so that's
that.
poison.
Right.
It's poison for the queen to take the rook. So the alternative is for the king, which was played. He played king takes f6, his 21st move for
Right.
black. So he's actually won a piece here.
Right.
All right.
So,
how
but
does?
Tarrasch continues his attack. He plays bishop to g5, check.
All right. Whoa.
The
whoa.
king only has a limited number of
there's
spaces to
only,
go
I
to.
see only 2 squares that king can go to. Now, what is wrong with playing the king here? In fact, the king here is a big mistake.
Well, yes, he can expose the king to check by moving the bishop and simultaneously attacking the queen with the bishop.
All
winning
right.
the queen. So he can't go there.
And there's also, I see another possibility of playing the bishop here.
There, that would be another.
Which attacks, which exposes. But this bishop now
Now
controls these squares. I think mate
Looks
is
like
coming
checkmate.
up.
Right, he can
It's
only
gonna be-
block it once
he can
quickly
only-
with a
He can only
pawn.
block with the pawn.
Right, and then queen takes.
So this would,
Right.
so this would be
Would be
checkmate.
checkmate,
All right, so
right.
he can't go to e5 with the
No.
king. So he plays king g7.
Right.
So that's actually black's 22nd move.
Okay.
All right. So how does Tarrasch continue?
Well, on move 23, he continues the attack, queen to h6 check,
All right.
giving the king only one square to
There's
go
only one
to.
square. King g8. All right.
Okay.
So now it's 24th move coming
Okay.
up for white.
Now he's going to move the rook over to the f-file, once again attacking the f7 pawn, threatening mate with bishop take pawn.
So bishop takes on f7 is checkmate.
Checkmate, so that has
Oh, that
to
has to
be-
be stopped.
Right.
All right. So there's only one way to stop that, is to come bring the rook over to f8. Rook is played over to f8 on the 24th move. All right. So what
then
does
then he-
Tarrasch do?
He threatens mate with bishop to f6, threatening the checkmate on g7.
Well, there's no way to stop that. Nowadays, professional players who would face this position would resign. Would you
Right.
agree?
Oh, yeah.
The contemporary players would not even continue. What Chigorin did, he played queen takes f6. Maybe out of frustration, maybe out of anger. He says, look, he realizes the game is lost, so he plays queen takes f6, which now allows white to play.
White then plays rook take the queen on f6, and that's when Chigorin
Yeah,
resigns.
there he throws in the towel.
Right, because mate is the next move.
Because the threat is, whatever he does, let's say, for example, let's say he would have played the bishop back to d8, attack the rook. Doesn't help.
No,
Yeah.
the checkmating move is rook take the knight on
G6?
g6.
Okay. So the attack, so he can't take with the f pawn because he's pinned.
Right, he's pinned.
So the only move he has is h takes g6.
And then the queen takes on g6, and that's checkmate.
That's checkmate. So that's actually what Chigorin was going to face in this position. So the pawn, let's put the pawn back. So this is the final position, and there was a pawn knight here. Okay, so this is the final position of this game, fifth game of this match. It was a long and brutal match, ended in a draw, as I said, and but it proved that Tarrasch was a force to reckon with. And you know, he was one of the leading players in the latter half of the 19th century, in the early part of the 20th century, and for a 20-year period, he won more strong tournaments than any other living player at that time. He won, there was 13 international tournaments, strong tournaments. He won 7 of them.
Right.
It was phenomenal. And he is actually known, if we have time, I want to read a quote. He is known for a number of quotes. He was a witty man, and he was very ingenious in his writings. But I'm going to read this, if time permits. He says that chess is a form of intellectual productiveness. Therein lies its peculiar charm. Intellectual productiveness is one of the greatest joys, if not the greatest one of human existence. It is not everyone who can write a play or build a bridge or even make a good joke. But in chess, everyone can, everyone must be intellectually productive, and so can share and so can share in the select delight. I have always a slight feeling of pity for the man who has no knowledge of chess, just as I would pity the man who has remained ignorant of love. Chess, like love, like music, has the power to make men happy. Well, Marty, it was a pleasure going over this game with you. It was one of the greatest games that Tarrasch played in his career. And we hope to see everybody next time for the next episode of Chess Chat.